Let's talk about labor today. In the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, there are more jobs in America than workers. And as a result, this is why factories early on turned to women and children to work in places like textile mills. And in the 1840s and 1850s, growing industries, new industries, need workers. In other words, there are jobs available in America. And what that means is that immigrants are going to start coming to America because of the availability of jobs. Just look at the numbers from 1820 compared to 1855. And the big areas that people are coming from are Northern and Western Europe. Ireland sends more immigrants to America during this time period before the Civil War than any other country. Germany sends the second most, and probably tied for third would be Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, and the Netherlands. Let's talk about some of those immigrants that were pushed out of their old country and come to America. The best example of this are the Irish. From 1845 to 1854, 1.5 million Irish immigrants came to America. This is a direct result of the potato famine in Ireland, where the potato crop, which was the staple of their diet, went bad. Almost all of the potatoes were rotten in the ground. And as a result, many people left Ireland. But these people are poor. They could only afford to go to England because timber ships that picked up timber and lumber in the Americas, Canada and like New England, would sail back over to England, and then they would load their ships up with stones to weigh their ships down for the trip back so that it didn't tip over. Well, somebody on these timber ships got the idea that they could charge people really cheap tickets to serve the same purpose as those stones that they were loading into their ship. So these English timber ships transported a number of Irish immigrants to America, but they weren't good living conditions. These weren't designed as passenger ships, and as a result, a lot of people got sick and died on these ships, which is why sometimes they were called coffin ships. Many of the Irish immigrants went where those ships were going, places like Boston, places like New York, and they're arriving very, very poor. They probably spent all the money that they had just getting the ticket. So they couldn't afford to buy land out west. And as a result, they stayed in those cities on the coast. And it's there in those cities that they worked low-paying jobs, they lived in slums. And remember, they are Catholic immigrants in a mostly Protestant country. All of these factors, poverty, working low-paying jobs, and being of a different religion than the majority of the country, lead to a lot of resentment, lead to some racism towards the Irish, and even lead to some violence towards them. This is a political cartoon from the era comparing the Irish in the North to black slaves in the South. Not all immigrants are pushed out of their old country. Some are pulled, like German immigrants. German immigrants come to America for relatively better economic opportunities. German immigrants left hard economic times in Germany. It wasn't necessarily a catastrophe like it was in Ireland with the potato famine. They're just coming for better opportunities. And some German immigrants simply came to be part of a more democratic government. They wanted to live in a country where they could have more say. These German immigrants came with money, and they came with real farming skills. And so when they arrived, many of them bought land in the Midwest. As a result of this, they are not as hated as the Irish. Many of them were Protestant, they are not arriving poor, and there's a strong English and American tradition of being prejudiced towards the Irish. So the Germans didn't have that working against them either. When there is economic opportunity in America, immigrants come to America. They came when there were jobs available. However, they stopped or slowed down when the American economy was struggling and jobs were hard to come by, as we can see by this graph here. As a result of immigration, the cities are growing. And as a result, the rich people start to move to the first suburbs, just outside of the city. The poor, for the most part, are the ones staying in the city. They're living in slums. They're living in poverty. They're dealing with disease and crime. And the city actually starts to act as a melting pot. and providing different groups an opportunity to come in contact with each other and form this group urban identity and kind of round off the edges of their old identities. Overall, immigrant labor is going to really fuel industrialization in America. We have not yet undergone an industrial revolution, but the factories and mines and the construction of those types of things, like railroads, is going to be done by immigrants, especially in the North. Now, in the South, they're using slave labor to build the railroads. But in the North, it's going to be a lot of Irish immigrants building the railroads. And we're going to see a shift. We're going to see more men working in factories over time, whereas originally factory work was seen as women's work. And when we have economic troubles like the Panic of 1837, businesses tend to focus on the bottom line, tend to focus on increasing profits. And some ways to do that are to increase the work days. It was common during, especially economic hard times, for workers to be required in factories to work 12-hour days. It was also common for wages to be lowered. And when these problems occur, labor starts to organize into groups. And these groups ask for things that would make their life better, like shorter work days or maybe even higher wages. One of the first examples of this is actually women in Lowell, Massachusetts, who formed the Female Labor Reform Association. However, as long as there is immigrant labor willing to work for less, immigrants are going to be less inclined to protest. Remember, they just got here. They don't want to do anything to tick off their boss. They don't want to do anything to endanger their job. So as long as there are people willing to work for less, organized labor is going to have little to no power over business owners.